the middle, for those of you that have just joined us during the second section of this presentation, in the middle and finishing up Module 4, and that is the section having to do with controllers. And we had started off with our controllers during that section, having already talked about the model, the view, and with our controllers, started off with our automations. And those automations included validation rules, both standard and custom. And we had gone and talked about other types of controllers that you could use using cross-object formulas or roll-up summary fields. And now we have moved into approval and approval processes, in which we just discussed the nuances and details, the 6 main parts, and the actions. We also discussed how they're deployed and how it starts with a button which submits an approval. It leads us to our next automation topic. And that next automation topic for us is the standard workflow and workflow rules. A little different when it comes to the parts of a workflow rule. As you can tell, it starts off with an evaluation criteria very similar to that of an approval process. What's unique about this is where the approval process may have multiple criteria, one that kicks it off just like the workflow does. The approval process can have multiple criteria within it based on the same object. For the workflow rule starts with a single object and a single set of criteria. The evaluations are done in one of 3 ways. First, when it is created, which is essentially once and done. When someone saves a record, this is going to kick off automatically. It does not require another submission approval button to be approved and get going. It just starts on its own. The second evaluation type of criteria is every time it is submitted for the very first time, in this case saved, and once it's saved automatically, anytime someone goes back to click on edit, this rule will run again. The name of this second evaluation is created and updated. The third type of evaluation criteria is a combination, except it takes into account specific criteria. So the third is called every time it is saved and edited and subsequently meets the criteria set. One of these 3 criteria are applied to any given workflow on a specific object set of data. It's the criteria itself that the business would give you that runs off of that object, and it runs in a particular time frame. Those time frames are defined as now or some time frame in the future. Workflow does not go backwards in time. So knowing that we've got E for evaluation, T for time triggers, and during a time trigger, A for action, there are only 4 kinds of actions that a workflow can run. 4 of them are the same kind of actions an approval process can run. They run in a particular order, and that order is fields, tasks, email, and outbound message. Again, they run in a particular order. So if we've established 4 parts of a workflow as an evaluation, a time frame, and action, the 4th part essentially is the criteria that kicks it all off. So if you remember, criteria, C, gives you an automation or an estimated time of arrival of one of these things, and E, T, and A, you've remembered the 4 main parts of workflow. Now some nuances. When we do it, first nuance were the 3 types of evaluation of your criteria. We know that in criteria, it's also the primary object that's been defined for workflow, but know that that primary could also include its parent information. So if a case was going to be created, and in an example of being notified when a case is created for a large account, we could use its parent data as well as part of our criteria set to get things going. We know this is always based on a record being saved. And if we define it's going to happen now, it bypasses through what's called a monitoring queue, and it goes straight out. And again, it goes out in the order of fields can be updated on this object and this record. Emails can be sent out regarding this record. Tasks can be done, and so can outbound messages. What's unusual is when doing an automated process like this, the only action that's viewable on a page layout for an end user during a workflow automation is that of the task, because tasks require someone to have completed or taken an action, and those actions are found on the view of the UI and the page layouts. Email alerts will not be seen on the page layout. If you need to see an email alert, you would need to go to an email monitoring queue in the back end of your Salesforce. And when getting to that email outbound monitoring queue, you can see a list on the screen of 20 most recent email alerts sent out of your system.
Does that make sense?
If you needed to, there is a link on that queue for you to request a download from Salesforce to track that email when it was sent out. And that request will give you a response with a link to a CSV file that'll show you the last 180 days or 6 months worth of emails in which you can go back and track your emails when they were sent. Field updates, when working with them, are also not tracked unless you choose to turn on field history tracking in your Salesforce for an object. Field history tracking allows you to track up to 20 fields on any given object and 4 data points. 4 data points include who modified it, when it was modified, what it is now, and what it was. There are 2 areas that you are not going to, and 2 types of fields that you're not going to get all 4 data points. Those 2 are long text fields and multi-select pick lists. They do not show in a field update what it is and what it was. And that makes sense. If you had a long text field and changed the word to, T-O, to the word to, T-O-O, you wouldn't want to see 131,000 characters reproduced again. So it just gives you 2 data points on the field history tracking if that's something that's necessary. An outbound message is sent out of Salesforce to another system, and the expectation is you could find that outbound message as an inbound in the other system and where you might find that data set. Now, knowing that these workflow actions always occur in a particular order, you should know you can do and have no more than 80 total actions for an entire workflow. And in any given one period of time and or time frame that you've designed, you may only put a maximum of 40 actions during that time frame. In doing so, you can only put a maximum of 10 of each action in any given time frame for the total of that 40. So 10 email alerts, 10 field updates, 10 tasks, or 10 outbound messages can all be done during an immediate action time frame or a time frame you define in the future. Another limitation of workflow is your future time frames. You may do a maximum of 10 future time frames, and this would be an example of what many of us have used and or are using as a set it and forget it kind of situation. And this would be an example of us trying to, 3 months prior to a contract renewal date, send an email automatically out to our sales rep to get that new renewal for the new deal signed. You could do it 3 months out. You could do it 1 month out. You could do it 30 days out or 15 days out, as long as the time frame doesn't exceed the number of 10 in total time frames that you've defined for a single workflow action. One last footnote. In all of these actions, if you decide to do one in the time frame in a future time frame, there is something special about field updates. Field updates, changing a field from something to something else automatically, can be recalculated. It can be, when it's done in the future and when putting in the rule criteria, reevaluated. So if it doesn't meet the criteria of your workflow, then it can pull automatically from the queue, and it is the only action that will do so. So with the 4 parts of workflow, evaluation, criteria, timeframes, and actions. You know the 4 parts of workflow, and you know the 4 actions that workflow can get to. With that, Salesforce enhanced our tool. So with the standard workflow and with the approval processes and with what came after approval processes flow, and Salesforce asked, what else can we do to better automate and better make this work? And what we did was take it to a whole different level with the next automation. And that next automation is the most recent and the most powerful of them all, the Process Builder. Lightning's Process Builder follows the same concept as far as starting, but gives us a better, faster UI to work with. It not only gives us a better UI, it allows us to click through that UI and do even more than possible than was done before. It starts very much like workflow and approval processes with an object set of data that's going to kick it off. In this example you're seeing on the screen, an opportunity. Key is the first diamond, or the set of criteria that is set, takes what that criteria is and does everything to the right of it. Very much like workflow, it has a criteria to start it off, and then it goes to your immediate actions. The key is it not only does the same types of things workflow does, it does more. When we do and execute these actions can actually go to another level. Unlike workflow, where we only have one set of criteria, a process builder may include many set of criteria. And when we put in many set of criteria, these sets of criteria and their related actions are called nodes. These nodes can be ordered, and this gives us even more control than ever before. Where workflow always performs the actions in order with fields, tasks, emails, and outbound messages, the Lightning Process Builder allows us to pick and choose what happens first and allows us to design exactly what we're looking to do. When we do this, the Lightning Process Builder's actions include many of the same ones that workflow does as well. You can, in the Lightning Process Builder, update fields. You can do tasks and send tasks out. You can send emails out. You cannot do an outbound message. Instead of the outbound message, you have the flexibility and the ability to use Apex in order to code in and do the exact same thing an outbound message would do, and then even more. So one thing the Lightning Process Builder does that the workflow and approvals don't is the ability to do and run with Apex and Apex code. But that's not all. As you'll see in the next few moments, you'll have a number of other actions that make this even more powerful. Now, when doing this and working with these nodes and these criteria, know that when you design each node, you can, until you activate it, rearrange the order of those nodes. The moment a process is built, the Lightning Process Builder locks the version that you are currently in and allows you to activate it. When it's activated, it locks in the order of which these things occur. So you would need to, if you needed to modify, update, or add new criteria or new actions to yours, create a new version of a Lightning process. Lightning processes with new versions, you can build up to 50 of them. And with 50 versions of one process, you can imagine the strength of not just having the one that's active running, but improving upon it and adding to it and doing what you needed to make it even more flexible and more powerful moving forward. Now, you can build in Salesforce up to 1,000 processes with Process Builder, but know that only one of each process can be active at a time. With that, there's a number of other things that you should consider when you're also working with Lightning Process. We know that, like workflow, this can automatically set and start based on criteria. So when we start it off, we should know that we can do it when a record is just created or when it's created or edited. But because the process goes beyond what workflow can, know that a business process using, in this case, A lightning process can start another lightning process or another automation. This could lead to things looping. We call this recursion in Salesforce. And to allow recursion, you and I have to check off the yes in the advanced box. But we should know that you can only have a process recur to a maximum of 5 times. If a process recurs more than 5, it will fail and it will not run. So knowing that we can do that, not only can we start the process, but we can do a number of other things above and beyond starting a new process as well. The other actions you can do in Lightning processes include the incredibly powerful creation of new records. Not only can you create records on the object set of data that you're on, you can create children records of the object set of data you're on. Like workflow, you can update a record, you can send an email, but here you can also post to Shatter. Use quick actions that you and I have developed. Automatically submit an approval process so someone doesn't have to click on the submit button. You can launch Flow and call Apex. Each of these different areas are supported, and actually with the process builder, as J.R. Tolkien said, you can control or rule all other automations with this. The power of this tool is unbelievable because it is the only tool that can automatically start all other automations in Salesforce. So knowing that you can do all of this work and literally daisy chain them together, knowing that recursion and or the order in which things are designed is very, very important. You should also know, as we head out of these processes that we're discussing right now with the Lightning Process Builder, this is built on the back of the next automation tool, and that is Flow. Flow, formerly called Visual Workflow, is the process builder's backbone. Flow allows you all sorts of new capabilities. What you're seeing in these screenshots is a little bit dated. Know that these resources, elements, and actions have been reconfigured in a new UI. And as of this recent spring's release, we all have a brand new Flow tool to work with. But to address some of the capabilities and having broken them down this way, know that the UI that you'll be seeing if you're using Flow currently is going to be slightly different. The first thing I'm going to address is the resources. Resources, as a general rule of thumb, are the things that the Flow can do behind the scenes. For instance, you can hold on to variables in your Flow. You can hold on to one, or you can hold on to many. You can reach out and you can touch one and or you can touch many different objects. You can hold on to data in Salesforce and or create data and lock it in as constants or build out formulas to do separate things inside your Flow. You can, with your text and or create choices and use radio buttons in Flow. If you recall, a radio button does not exist in Salesforce field types, but it does if you're building with Flow. Now, having addressed the resources of what happens behind the scenes in Flow, what happens in front for your end users is you and I can create brand new screens that allow your end users to walk step by step through processes, which is one of the major basic intents of Flow when it first started. Knowing that you can design and develop streamlined screens to walk people through anything from forms to questionnaires to actually different UI that you can embed as components inside of your Salesforce Lightning page layouts. These screens can lead to different types of logic. This logic is actually applied inside of your Lightning Process Builder as well. You can actually, with Flow, have someone make decisions and do what we call branching or assignment. You can go through and loop through records. So you can look for not just one, but many different records to hold on as variables in your Flow. And you can do something that the previous tool can do as well. And that's through daisy chaining through Flow and doing what's called a paused and wait, or a paused and waiting interview, as you might have seen it in the past. In the middle of using a process in the process builder, or in this case with the flow, you can actually pause the entire set of criteria until another criteria is set and hit, and you can restart the flow and or in this case the process builder extension. Now with each of these elements that are part of what you can build with flow, you can tell that it's much stronger and much more powerful than a simple workflow. Like workflow, it can update records. Like process builder, it can create records. Where the process builder can create records of its own type and children, this can create any type of record at any time. You can look records up, so you can pull data or variables back into flow. And the one thing this tool does that none of the others do is you can delete records using flow. Now you'll notice on the data actions that there's a number of fast things that are done. Simply put, those don't exist in the same view or format moving forward. Know that simply, fast means not one record at a time. It means thousands of records. So when you do this and you go looping through and find out what are all the accounts that Kevin Corcoran has, and you design a flow that says take all of his important or high value accounts and give them to person A, and take all of his other accounts and give them to person B, you and I can build a flow that'll loop through all of my accounts, separate them out, and assign them back to the appropriate individuals. There are tons of other actions flow will do. And as you'll notice in your static actions, from posting to chatter, to sending emails, to submitting for approvals, to doing any quick action that you've designed or that comes out of the box, is part of the power of flow. But to top it all off, flows can even start flows. So in branching, you can actually have one flow started from a single department. You could feed that to a different department, different group, different object set of data, depending on choices that have been made. And then you can loop through those actions, but you don't need to even do that with flow in the exact same way as you had in the past, I should say. Know that flow by itself, when it's created and as the original or the backbone of the Lightning Process Builder, know that flow, when you save your flow for the first time, creates a link or a URL for you. This is where flow, when you've saved it, also creates a version. The version of flow is locked when it's activated. And when you lock it, there are extra steps to go through to make sure your end users can use your flow. On a user record, flow user is a feature checkmark box in order for people to go through. But some of the other steps you need to know about when going and working with flow is flow originally is intended to use that URL to start it off. When we start off a flow, we would start it off by using a link on a page or anything that could get to a URL, such as a tab or a button or a hotspot on the page, and or as you and I go through, anything that can use the URL, including typing into the URL. With that in mind, we would normally create a physical location for a flow to get started manually, and that manual kickoff of the flow can even pass variables if it's on a record from the record that you're looking at into the flow to make what you want to have happen. This would be an example of trying to create a record from another record. So example would be if I were in human resources and I were hiring for a new position. When I hired for the position, I wanted to automatically fill out information regarding a candidate's job application and pull them all together. I could pull the variables from my position and slide them into a new child object. Now, yes, you could do this with your process builder, but where I could create new records would be possibly in a different object set of data for my HR department. And I could actually create a whole new subset of records, which Process Builder could not do unless the two objects were associated. Now, having done that, this would be an example of using a screen-based flow and making decisions in which way to go. I don't, though, have to do a screen-based flow. You and I can actually build, using the process builder and the flow, an automation from the process builder to kick off a flow and pass the variables automatically. This is called an auto launch flow. The auto launch flow is created by building the flow first and then going in and building a process in the process builder, Lightning Process Builder, that says when these criteria are met, start this flow. So when doing auto launch flows, a very important part of it is to know that you cannot use screens when you kick off an auto launch flow. So when we do work with flow, there are two different areas to consider. There is a third that is not on this list we'll mention. The first of which, flow can be started manually and is typically manually done. Now that it's manually done, an input screen often is used, and it's got to be kicked off manually through a button link or Visualforce page. The auto launch uses the process builder. It maps it all. You cannot use a screen input, and everything is already met if the criteria is hit and inserted, updated, deleted, or does what you want. There is a third-party start to the flow, which means if you are using something like single sign-on, you can use that external system to auto-launch your flow as well. When we go in, there are different uses for flow. There are different cases for process builder, and you should be able to apply the appropriate one based on the appropriate conversation. When looking at these conversations, for instance, post opportunity information to all sales group every time a deal is worth $100,000 and closed. How would you do this? By use of the word post, you might consider the post to chatter. So when you post to chatter, what tools will do this? And is it automatically kicked off or is it manually done? If I were looking at this and I were to post to chatter, I know that while both flow and process builder could work for it, because it's automatically, I'm not going to be there for every person and I don't want them to press an extra button to start it. I would do this through the process builder and post to chatter that way. On the top right, update all the mailing addresses on all child contacts when billing addresses change for an account. In doing this, we know that, again, both tools work, but we're not going to monitor all accounts. So when we don't monitor or press a special button on all accounts to manually do this, we want it to automatically happen. Updating children records is possible through the process builder. The example on the lower left-hand side, creating a contact record for each candidate entered from the HR system. To automatically create a child record, this is not necessarily a child record, is it? So in order to do this, the combination would mean, although I could start with the process builder, because it is a different object set of data, it would need to pass that data into a flow, and it's the flow that can create any record type that it wishes. So an auto launch flow would be more appropriate. And then finally, creating an order record with the data in the opportunity and associated account when the opportunity stage changes to closed one. The use of that, the order record, consider where it comes from. And it's not a single object, it's multiple objects that it is. In creation of records, you could create a record, a single record as a child, but this is a child going back and doing an update with the account and contact. So when you're looking at this, you would have to make that decision again, which would it be? In going through all these automations, you and I know that there's a list of actions that come with each of the different automations. So we should be able to, at this point in time, fill out what are the actions of the quick action, what are the actions of the workflow, the approval process, flow, and process builder. But the second aspect that we need to consider is how each is deployed uniquely. And knowing the answers are partially here on the next automation tool reference slide, given any scenario, you should be able to take that scenario and say, I know how this is being asked to be started. Is it a manual thing? Is it a combination of things? Know that your certification task always alludes to the detail, the nuance, and will tell you pick one or pick two that meet this resolution. Most of them are pretty clear, but they're going to make you think through them. So if I were to ask you of all these automations, which is the most appropriate to use when it comes to creating a new record from a mobile device? You might remember mobile and the hint of quick action. The most effective being the quick action as it's built into the mobile device, and it can create records from where you are, either globally or on an object-specific action. If I were to try and do this in a different system, and I needed to pause something and start over, depending on how I framed or phrased that, you know the only two are going to pause and wait for another set of criteria would be flow and the process builder. So then the question becomes, what is the rest of the story? Would I use it to kick it off automatically, or is this something that is manually done as we go through? So going in, use the automation tool reference guide to go ahead and study up on what actions and how you can deploy these different automations. Also note that automations, because when a record is saved, can be done in many ways, have different effects. So when it comes to, for instance, workflow, or it comes to flow or process or approval, know that what if we mass load data? Does this work in the same manner? Know that all of them are based on saving a record, but also know that that means that each of these have to have, or would ordinarily have, a certain order in which they actually execute. And that is truth, and that is what we are going to eventually come up to. So know that that order of execution matters in what would happen first, second, and third. And we know none of these will start without passing through standard validation and then custom validation first. As you and I move out of our automations and the details of the automations, we're headed towards app deployment. And in the module 5, we're clearing new information maybe once again for you. This deployment area is going to do a quick overview over the next half an hour, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and discuss those key milestones in a very general way of how we at Salesforce look at lifecycle. We're going to discuss the types of sandboxes that you can build with, and literally the point and click considerations as app builders we will take when using a change set, as opposed to making the decision to work with a managed or unmanaged package. We're going to come up with those plans considering all of the nuances of a build that we're working on. And those nuances are things that we want to make sure we catch and pay attention to. So when talking about application lifecycle management in general, we know that Salesforce takes a very simplified approach. Each of your companies, by the way, will have its own approach, details, nuances. And certainly you're going to apply those moving forward. But as app builders, you should understand and be able to address, what do I do for each of these bullet points, and what are the tools I use, and what do I need to know about them in moving forward? For instance, in the plan, build, test, and deploy lifecycle management plan, we would gather our information. How would you gather that information? What would you look at? Maybe you might look at, as far as visually, a schema builder, as far as to see what's built already versus what's been customized and what's missing. Maybe in gathering information, we should be asking those correct questions of, at the end of the day, what are we trying to accomplish and how do we know we've done so? So if we re-engineer or backwards engineer it from a dashboard that tells us something, we know a dashboard doesn't show anything unless it's got a report, and a report doesn't tell us anything unless we've got the right fields, and the list goes on. Best practice is you start with gathering and conducting analysis. Now I'll tell you, as I go through each of these different parts, especially in the plan, I would tend to, in mine, and most of your consultants out there in the past do the same thing, will have designed through the planning phase everything
Or if you're
needed
gonna go,
for
you can go.
build,
You don't have to wait
test,
for me.
and deploy as part of their plan. That's why many teams, when going through
I just feel better knowing
agile kind
this
of
will
process,
be
are
okay
going to
once,
get to see those roll out piece
in
by piece
theory.
in the sprints that you're working on. Or if you're still doing a blended process of agile and
Oh
waterfall, you might actually
no,
be
I was gonna
you
do that
doing
anyway
them
for
in a
you.
different frame. So with that, conducting analysis. Do I have the right fields? Do I have the right objects? Do I have the right relationships to get you the data at the end of the day? Design specifications would include who are the user groups that are part of this. So who are the people that are involved? Do we have them already in our system? And are they part of a particular
Oh yeah,
group
because they're obvious.
and or profile? So as you and I consider and you start going through the rest of these details like security access, having now developed those appropriate profiles and role hierarchies and looking at it, we've got a plan to start building and
Oh,
we
did
start
he?
writing out the application in the build process.
Oh, for sure.
Now, in the build process, you always want to consider model, view, controller, and security. Know that when you build the model, view, and controller, security is part of it as the step-by-steps go through. So also know that you are always building, planning, and building hopefully in sandboxes rather than in production. The only time you build in production is if this has not been rolled out to the company at all. And you might consider building in production first. And then eventually, once the rollout goes in, you'll create a sandbox, which we'll talk about momentarily, and the nuances of building from there. When going through your MV and finally getting to your C, what are the right tools? And do you use that same methodology we started today off with of do you go clicks before code? And you know, those clicks might be as simple as there might be a better situation already built that we could leverage through the App Exchange and partners to be up and running faster. So that is the kind of design methodology, and even in the build, you should be taking on. Once you've documented and gone through these steps, then it's time to test your work. And in testing your work, you should know that you're testing in sandboxes. And there are 4 kinds of sandboxes we're going to dig into that you should be aware of. Are we building and are we testing in the appropriate sandbox? And as we do this testing, are we extending this and doing end user testing and training as well? Know that when you are building, you're going to make sure you're keeping track of your build and your design as you go along. So it's easy to pull all these pieces together once they've been successfully tested and to move them into production when you're ready. Know that part of that is when you're working with code, all code has got to be built in a sandbox before, and it has to be tested at a 75% higher pass rate. So saying that it's going to work better than 75%, and making sure that we have our tests up to par before we go in and try and move it into a sandbox. Otherwise, it won't allow that to occur and won't allow that to deploy. Finally, in your testing is your end user training and or testing, making sure that if you need to tweak it, you can get those things done. And maybe if you're using not just one type of sandbox, but multiple, you'll move from one sandbox to the next as you go through your phases of building and testing.
The formula works, yep.
Finally,
Both ways,
that
I did
brings
2
us
samples,
to
yep.
pulling the whole package together. And in Salesforce, if we're using it, packages are certainly one way of going. Although we, as app builders, might decide to use the declarative tool of point and click called a change set. When we do this, we don't do it during business hours. We should schedule it off hours, make sure that we have all of our people ready to do the testing, because once we move it from a sandbox into production, we need to go back and make sure that we've got all the right pieces in play and retest it before we go ahead. And with that validation prior to testing and prior to deployment, and then post-deployment tests, you and I can go ahead and open it up for everybody to move forward with their build. So a ton of detail in lifecycle management, things to be aware of, but as you are aware of them, we're going to fill in some of those blanks for those of us doing this for the first time. For instance, we know we shouldn't build in production. We should be building in sandboxes once production's up and running. For those of us that are doing this, we know that a sandbox comes from and is created from production. This means that this is a known org in your Salesforce. We know the sandbox comes in different flavors. And when we build what we need to build and do our testing, we are going to take it up and wrap it up like that nice, pretty castle we see in the sandbox. We're going to move that application or that object or that build into production together. Know that that movement is either called a change set, a managed package, or an unmanaged package. When designing, all three are going to accomplish at the end of the road the same thing, but how they work and when they work is different. A change set can only be used in a known sandbox. So what we're saying essentially is, if it came from production and it knows it belongs or it came from there in the first place, a change set may be used. You can use both managed and unmanaged packages in these cases as well. A change set may not be used if you're going from an unknown sandbox and or unknown production to another production org. You must use a managed or unmanaged package instead. So with that, building these sandboxes and knowing that we are going to spin up a brand new sandbox from production, we need to know the 4 different types of sandboxes we can spin up. The first one at the top of the screen is the largest, the most extensive, and the most expensive. So when we do a full sandbox, know that we get all of our metadata for every single one of these. But in a full sandbox, we also get the option of gathering all of the data from the moment that it's spun up. So all of our production metadata, build, design, architecture, and all the data can be pulled into a full sandbox. Know that as of a couple of years ago, in a full sandbox, you don't have to take all your data. You can choose what we call templates instead. And that is exactly what the partial data sandbox allows you to do as well. Know that a full sandbox can only be refreshed once a month or once every 29 days to be specific. And when we get and spin it up once every 29 days, we got to wait 29 days to go ahead and refresh it again if we want it done that way. Now, the partial data sandbox is the only other sandbox that you can bring not just all of your metadata in, which comes in automatically for you, but it's your data that you get to pick and choose from. The partial data sandbox only allows you to use what we call templates. So if you're saying you want to test with account data, you get to choose the account object. You do not get to choose the data. The data comes in from your org with a maximum of 10,000 records. And in all of the data that you choose in your templates, you get no more than 5 gigabytes of practice data in it. The beauty, it can be spun up once every 5 days instead of, which is essentially once a week, rather than once a month. The last two, Developer Pro and Developer Sandboxes, respectively, are smaller sandboxes. They get all of the metadata, the same thing full and partial get with your build, your design, the architecture, but they never will get any data moved into them. The developer sandbox is a gigabyte in maximum amount of data you can type in and or load with the data loader. The developer sandbox itself, not Developer Pro, but Developer, the smallest, you can put a maximum of 200 megabytes of data to do your work and testing with. The great thing about both of these is they can be used once and updated once per day from your production org. So when you update them, they are ready to go, fresh and ready to use. So if I were to give you a scenario in your certification and testing, saying I need to, in this case, I've gotten to the point of my build, my design, to do user training. And I'm going to go to a different city inside of my company every day. And in a different city, in a different office, I'm going to train 20 different people. And in that city, in that office of training different 20 people, which of these sandboxes would you use to make that happen? The answer to that would be just a process of elimination for you. So you would look at it and say, well, full sandboxes, not going to work because 20 days once every month is not a good update, and that eliminates partial data as well. So I only get to update these once per day. And if a new group of people is going to be trained on it, I know that with my data loader and a source command line tool, I can write to a simple set of data every night at midnight, automatically update my sandbox, and load new data in. And more data is better than less in training. So the correct answer for that type of scenario would be Developer Pro Sandbox is the appropriate one to use. Knowing each of these nuances and knowing what you use, know the smallest to the largest size would be Developer Sandbox from the bottom, working your way back up. Know that all orgs that are enterprise orgs, unlimited or performance editions, newer versions of Salesforce's orgs, as long as it's the longer, bigger editions than enterprise, will always get one sandbox automatically with your contract. And the one that comes with enterprise is the partial data sandbox. Know that with every company, you get to negotiate with Salesforce and or pay Salesforce for the other sandboxes you wish to use. A perfect world would give you maybe 10 or 20 sandboxes at the smallest level, and then 5, 6 Developer Pro, 2, maybe 3 partial data, and 2 or 3 full sandboxes. Know that this is negotiated by every company independently, and you're going to talk about, and there's no contract I've ever seen that's the same, but that you would be able to use with these different sandboxes to take your original builds, your alphas, to roll them in and do testing with more data in Developer Pro. And when you have Developer Pro, rolling that to a partial data for more data, making sure it works and we're not writing over each other's programs and or applications. And then finally rolling those into a full data type of sandbox to bang against to make sure UAT is done. Finally, from the full sandbox, in a perfect world, then you might roll that into production and you're ready to roll. Is that likely going to happen in all of our companies? Not necessarily. Many of us only have a handful, maybe 2 or 3 developer sandboxes and 1 partial data. And we go straight from developer to partial data, do our testing, do our UAT, do our training and or demonstrations, and then move into production for the rest. So with all of these sandbox types, we know that these sandboxes are known orgs when they get spun from a production org. So this means when it comes time to take our build and move our new build and our new design from our sandbox into our production or into the next testing sandboxes you're seeing on the screen, we need to wrap those different parts or components up. These different parts and components all wrapped up in a declarative way is what we call building a change set. We would take each of those different parts we built and designed for whatever it is we're working on, and we'll wrap them up inside of our outbound. But prior to just pushing them into inbound, we have to go through some extra steps. We would start by going to the one that we want to move everything into and say, is it allowed to let stuff come in from this other place? Once doing what's called an inbound acceptance or an inbound acknowledgement from another sandbox or from production, then we go to the outbound, do our build, pull the parts together. We cannot pull more than 2,000 components into a single change set. If you've got more than 2,000, you probably have some issues anyway. So, and I've worked with some pretty large applications. You want to break them down into palatable things you can upload and you can bring over into production or into a new sandbox. So with it all wrapped up, what we do is upload. And when you click on the upload button from the outbound sandbox, it locks that change set and all the components together. This means you cannot make changes to it again. When you do this, it loads it up to the back end of the App Exchange. And that's where you return to the inbound and you'll click on the test button. That test button makes sure that everything that you're about to bring in looks like it's going to work. It may not have all the components. And if it does not have all the components you need to make it work, it will fail. And if one component is missing, all components fail. This is okay. It's not a big deal. So what you do is return to your outbound change set, create a new version, V2, and then fix it, adding the right component, and then going back to retest it. Now this is great because the inbound allows you to retest the new version, and if it looks like it works, you can accept it and bring it to your inbound, and or this is the testing sandbox or production as it goes. Now there are some nuances to that. Know that when a change set is brought in, all of it works or none of it works. Know that not all components get to be moved in from one sandbox to another or from a sandbox to production. There are some components that must be manually done.
It should be a simple
Know
one.
that those components, and I'm just going to generally state, when you wrap all of these pieces or components up into a change set that are not included and not going to change inside of production or change or be updated inside of your other sandbox, the inbound side, would include standard object cred settings for profiles. Standard object cred settings.
And you said he's not going to do any sample test questions?
Profiles are two areas in which you are not going to get all of the different components within a change set to do an update. It means that you have to go to the inbound after the change set is brought in and manually go back through standard object cred settings. So now there is a laundry list, and if you look inside of the group that we all have going in the collaboration group for Platform App Builder Study Cohort, previously in our app study cohort, there is a simple laundry list you can find with help and training, and it's already been listed in the Q&A section. And that link will show what are all the things that are included with the change set. So if you need to use that checklist, you can go to and get it. Knowing that's the case, when we do it, know that change sets are always additive. So as I speak to the additive part, this additive part means when we bring a change set from one sandbox to the other, if the change set has been renamed in version 2, it's not going to be brought and rewrite over the top of the old change set. Rename metadata is going to be brought in as brand new data. So you'd be essentially having had created it twice if you brought it in the first time and thought, oh, we need to change the name of that. Know that deployed metadata overwrites it. It is not merged to the data. And know when you do change sets and move them from point A to your target, point B, you cannot undo something. For instance, if you had set cred settings to create, read, edit, delete, you cannot go in and remove the delete by trying to overwrite it. You manually have to physically go into the target organization, whether it's production or whether it's the other sandbox, the inbound sandbox, and you have to deselect the delete from there. The components must be deleted manually if you do not want them to be a part of it. Now, we had mentioned that change sets are one tool, the point and click tool that we as app builders can use, but there are other tools that can be leveraged as well to do the exact same thing in known organizations. The Force.com IDE and migration tool are two tools that we find. Tools and toolkit selection. The Force.com ID or Eclipse is one that allows us to do the metadata build design. The migration does it on an ANSI-based or Apache script. And as you use those two different tools, you can do the same thing change sets do in a coded fashion. What's important to note about these is these two tools are the two tools that will allow you to go from an unknown org to another unknown org. So if it is not known, if it's not coming from your production, you're going from one production to another production, or from a sandbox that you own to a corporate sandbox from somewhere else, you cannot use a change set. but you can use the IDE or migration tool. Know that there is a new alternative tool that we are highly recommending everybody to lean towards. And that new tool is called DX. As a matter of fact, DX has been around now for just about a year in both beta and generally available. And it is the newer, stronger, better tool to be using if you are a programmatic user of Salesforce. With that stated, and knowing that these other two tools can work, you should know that in taking a tool like the IDE or migration tool, you would be building not a change set, but either an unmanaged package or a managed package. And in this, a managed package acts like a change set, but it allows us to go from one production to totally different production orgs. What we would do is build it, and we could directly put it into the org, or we could load it to the back end of the App Exchange. If you load it unmanaged package to the back of the App Exchange, the person who loads it will get an email, and the email will have a link in it. That link is available to anybody that has access to it. That person who is trying to take it from their build, their design, their production to another totally different production area would then go into the other production areas, and with the link say, I want to pull down and in this package. The unmanaged package is different than a managed package for a lot of reasons. Let's use a brand new application and an unmanaged package coming in. Once that is built, typically unmanaged packages are one and done. What I mean by that is an unmanaged package you might find actually on the App Exchange. Salesforce or Force.com team builds a lot of them to enhance and make easily available a lot of really neat kind of resources for us. Things like adoption reports, in which 30 or 40 reports are built with 5 or 10 dashboards and some automations and fields that are built in. We don't have to spend any of the time doing it. We just grab the package, we bring it up and running. So the catch with that is these packages that are built for the time and release that they're built in. So that package is not necessarily going to upgrade from a classic to a lightning. Unmanaged packages are built in the time frame they're in. So let's say we download our new unmanaged package. The beauty is we end users in new product get access to everything as part of that unmanaged package. We'll get to see and modify the code, the fields, the whatever we need to do typically. So those unmanaged packages aren't ever going to update what exists already. They're usually new portions or new builds, but allow us to get up and running much more quickly in a much more flexible way. So the nice thing about the unmanaged package is if it does not work altogether, it usually is easy to uninstall. There's a click link, uninstall, and everything goes with it. But with that in mind, when you uninstall an unmanaged package, you're also deleting all data just as if you were deleting any object or fields that were there. Now, this is also a challenge because when you deal with unmanaged packages, what if a new release comes up? Or what if you've moved now from Classic to Lightning? It does not mean the unmanaged package will work. So you will have to go ahead and modify all parts of that unmanaged package based on whatever release and based on the design or architecture of that package itself. Managed packages, on the other hand, have strict requirements. And those strict requirements, unlike an unmanaged package, make the designers of the managed package go through extra hoops. In using Salesforce's SDK or design kits, you got to go through, and if you're building a managed package, it's got to meet specific requirements. You'll find on the App Exchange, many of those managed packages are paid for packages. And when you download or work with a managed package, you do not get access to all of the objects, fields, and or code in your system. Depends on the package. Know that a managed package, if designed in Salesforce, must, if a release or a new version of that package comes up, must notify the users and or people that have purchased it that there is a new version available. It also does not work like the unmanaged package in the fact that when you're installing the new version, the code to design the architecture of a managed package must take into account all the manual things and do them automatically for you that uninstalling a package and installing a package and testing and making sure the data is safe must do. That means a managed package is very similar to downloading a program, clicking yes, I want to install it, yes, I want to make sure it works, yes, it's for admins or for everybody, and yes, go ahead. And it takes care of magically the work. Well, we know that magic work is not so magic. It's just a lot of code. And that ton of code ensures that your data is safe, ensures the package is doing the updates, ensures that the right fields have been either removed, deleted, and new fields have been put in, or labeled properly, and everything works before it's completely installed. That's not true on an unmanaged package. An unmanaged package is as you get it. So if you want to put in a new version of an unmanaged package, you have to download manually all of your data. You pull all of your data out of your system, you save that data, then you go in and delete all of the fields or pieces you don't want. As you delete it all, it deletes the metadata and the data out of your system, and then you install the new package, and you reinstall manually all of the data. You have to jump through the hoops in an unmanaged package, where managed packages typically will take those hoops on for you and do the work. So having gone through all of these different aspects, you should know now the difference between a change set, a managed package, and unmanaged package. Ways to deploy from one production to the other with what we call source orgs, and or in this case, using the IDE, so the Eclipse tool, and or the migration tool, and now potentially DX. Know that these are not the only tools out there to use. You too could go to the App Exchange and find a number of other tools that you could be using, encoding and or programming to do this work. So, but know that these are the ones that we are offering as far as through the developer website and have traditionally used with Salesforce. Know that the change set is special and cannot deploy from one production to another production because they're unknown to each other. So we need to know that that is special and can only be done through sandboxes and known sandboxes and known production orgs. With that, I'm going to go ahead and come to our last module, and we're headed towards our conclusion. And as we head to the conclusion, got a couple of tips, pointers as you move forward, get prepared for your certification. The first of which is the exam and the examination format. Know that the exam format, as you're seeing on the screen, is a little bit different than the one you'll see in real certification. Currently, the test is 65 multiple choice questions. Takes 90 minutes. On this screen, it's actually 105 that they give for you. For the 5 extra questions that they're doing testing on, they give you an extra 25 minutes. Knowing that it goes, 15. And knowing it's 65 questions and 105 minutes, not just 60 and 90 minutes here. 63% is listed on this score. I believe that ranges from 63 to 65, depending on the release. It is still available in 4 languages: German, French, Japanese, and English. Registration for your first certification test for Platform App Builder is $200. And if during the same release period of time, so let's say you take it during spring release, if you need to retake it, many of us do have to take it a second time, then it's only $100 for the retake. What's wonderful about this is know that you and I have the ability with the end of today and with the coupon code, you're going to get $70 off of that. With that, in taking the test, when you go to the test, there are 2 physical ways traditionally you take it. One, when you register through the web assessor, the webassessor.com is how you would register for a test. You'll be given an option to take it in a testing center. These testing centers are run by Criterion, and you can look up the physical locations for the testing centers all around the world and look for that physical location as part of your signing up for the test. In a testing center, you'll be asked to empty your pockets. You can take nothing in. So all of your pockets, they usually have locked down cubby holes for you to store anything that you have, like your keys or your wallet or anything else, watches, and it will put all of that information into a lockdown bin. You'll walk into a computer, and the computer will have a screen that says, here are the requirements for taking a certification test, and please acknowledge these as far as the exam requirements overall. In front of you in a testing center, you'll have 3 pieces of blank paper and a pencil. And these 3 pieces of paper and pencil have to be turned in before you leave the room. You cannot take them out with you.
But she didn't send us the answers.
Once you've acknowledged the first kickoff,
I can figure out.
you start your test, and 1 question comes up on the screen at a time, and there will be a countdown clock on your screen as well. So as you answer your questions and go through them, you are given a prompt on the questions to say, answer the correct answer, or choose 2 that are correct, or choose 2 that are incorrect.
Well, yeah, no kidding. Because
pay attention to the prompts as you go through and take your test. As you go through the test,
so you shouldn't have to go through all this
in the testing center,
gobbledygook.
you do have those papers, and that's where you're going to work out the nuances and details of what we've talked about today, and or some highlights